paying tariffs, and we will not be paying tariffs. Our deal with India is they pay tariffs. This is a reversal from what it used to be, as you know. India, and I think Prime Minister Modi is a great gentleman, a great man, actually, but he was much smarter than the people that he was against in terms of the United States. He was ripping us off in India. So we made a deal with India, and it's a fair deal now, and we are not paying tariffs to them, and they are paying tariffs. We did a little flip.
So we're up as of now for this, Mr. President.
No, the India deal is on. Yeah.
Mr. President. Thank you so much, Mr. President.
All the deals are on. It's just, we're just going to do it a different way.
Mr. President.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. I think there's another war that you stole and you should take the credit, which is in Syria. Secretary Rubio, after his meeting in Munich with the Syrian Foreign Minister and the Kurdish General Muslim Abdi, he said that President Trump was directly involved in efforts to stop the fighting between the Kurds and the Syrians. How will your administration make sure that this peace is sustained? And do you support the idea of...
Well, it's a very different topic, and so I don't want to spend a lot of time, but all I can say is that the president of Syria, who I essentially put there, is doing a phenomenal job. He's a rough guy. He's not a choir boy. A choir boy couldn't do it. But Syria is coming together, really coming together well. And thus far, he's been very good to the Kurds. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. President, what's your message to the Iranian people after 2 rounds of talks with them? Do you have any message to the Iranian people?
The Iranian people in Iran or people here?
People in Iran.
They better negotiate a fair deal. You know, the people of Iran are a lot different than the leaders of Iran. And it's very, very sad situation. But 32,000 people were killed over a relatively short period of time. They were going to hang 800, 2 weeks ago, hang, some by crane. They lift them up with a tall crane, and they play them around the square. They were going to hang 837 people. And I gave them the word, if you hang one person, even one person, that you're going to be hit right then and there. I wasn't waiting 2 weeks and negotiating. And they gave up the hanging. They didn't hang 837. Supposedly, they didn't hang anybody. But no, I feel very badly for the people of Iran. They've lived in hell. Please.
Thank you, Mr. President. You mentioned multiple times foreign influence over the Supreme Court. Do you have evidence of that? And if not, will you investigate that?
You're going to find out.
What alternatives are you going to put into place in your relationship with Europe and also those tariffs that have been called illegal? How they're going to go impact the relationship with Russia, that you sanction
well,
some
I want
countries?
Europe to strengthen up. Europe has gone woke. Europe is not recognizable when you go into so many places. Not all countries. You look at Hungary. You look at Poland, Czech, Slovenia. There are some countries that have gone very much the opposite. Some really, and some others. But Europe has to be strong, and they've become soft and not recognizable. You go into some of the countries, I don't want to be specific, but I think everyone knows what I'm talking about, and they're not recognizable. They've become, the environmentalists have taken over. They've got windmills destroying their fields and their beautiful meadows and their oceans, and they're paying a fortune. Now, Europe has to get smart. Europe's getting killed on 2 things, energy and immigration. And if they don't solve both of them fast, Europe is not the same place. Yeah, please.
Mr. President, Justices Gorsuch and Barrett, are you surprised in particular by their decision today? And do you regret nominating them?
I don't want to say whether or not I regret. I think their decision was terrible. Yeah. I think it's an embarrassment to their families. You want to know the truth. The 2 of them. Yeah.
Specifically on that $2,000 tariff check.
Mr. President,
I didn't call you.
You didn't call me?
Yeah, Mr. President, to be clear, do you believe at the end of implementing these new tariff tools, the tariff rate and tariffs will ultimately be higher than they currently are?
Potentially higher.
How much higher?
It depends, whatever we want them to be. But we want them to be fair for other countries. And, you know, we have some countries that have treated us really badly for years. And it's going to be high for them. And we have other countries that have been very good, and it's going to be very reasonable for them. Yeah.
Specifically on the tariffs question, I mean, on the $2,000.
I didn't call you.
Mr. President, thank you, Mr. President. Do you have any plans to travel to India for the Quad Summit, and how do you think your relationship with India is right now?
I think my relationship with India is fantastic, and we're doing trade with India. India pulled out of Russia. You know, India was getting its oil from Russia, right? And they pull way back at my request because we want to settle that horrible war where 25,000 people are dying every month. And my relationship with Prime Minister Modi is, I would say, great. I also stopped a war between India and Pakistan, as you know. There were 10 planes we shot down. That war was going and probably going nuclear. And just yesterday, the Prime Minister of Pakistan said President Trump saved 35 million lives by getting them to stop. That's and I did it largely with tariffs. I said, look, you're going to fight, that's fine, but you're not going to do business with the United States, and you're going to pay a 200% tariff, each country. And they called up and they said, we have made peace. Okay? I just want to thank you all. Look, great certainty has been brought back to the economy of the United States and actually the economy of the world, because we generate so much in the world. We're the biggest in the world, and we're now the strongest by far. We were a country that was dead 1.5 years ago. Now we have the hottest country in the world. We're going to keep it that way. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
You have been listening, of course, to President Trump live there at the White House press briefing room, talking about what has been now our top story, not only of Friday, but really for the week overall, as the U.S. Supreme Court struck down President Trump's global tariffs. I will say some of the headlines coming from that press conference, he spoke for over half an hour or so. He said alternatives will be used to replace rejected tariffs. He also said all the trade deals are on, we're just doing it differently. He talked about, too, a 10% tariff across the board, and he says, I think starting 3 days from now. He talked about the refunds, which is something the Supreme Court did not weigh in on, how it has to be litigated for a couple of years. And he continues to go on. I do want to welcome you to Bloomberg Business Week Daily on this Friday, what is turning out to be a very busy Friday. I'm Carol Masser. Tim Stenivek is off today, but joining me here in our studio is our own Emily Grafeo. She follows the market. She follows the credit markets. But again, talking about these tariffs, it sounds like the president's going to find his own way forward here.
And you look at how the market reacted, Carol. Stocks rebounded. The NASDAQ 100 is now up about 1% with Trump even talking about using alternatives. But we also saw stocks rallying even this morning when the Supreme Court did rule that those tariffs exceeded the president's authority.
Yeah, that ruling coming out just after the market opened, it was really kind of fascinating to see, and it really shifted kind of our focus here. But you do have a market right now where you do have the S&P 500 up about 0.6 of a percentage point, pretty much hovering near its highs of the session. Same story for the NASDAQ 100. I do also want to point out that the president talked about foreign influence on the Supreme Court. He said, in my opinion, the court has been swayed. So covering a lot of ground. He talked about a few other issues, too, in terms of the Middle East. I'm going to tell you that over the next 60 minutes, we're going to be all in on this, on that Supreme Court decision, what it really means, what are the president's or might be the president's next step when it comes to what is a key part of his platform. We're also going to get into what we thought was going to be our top story on this Friday, and this has to do with U.S. economic data that delivered what some say is a messy message of both hotter than expected inflation and slower than anticipated growth. And then, Emily, we've got to talk about Iran. I mean, we have seen so many different narratives play out this week in markets, but geopolitical concerns is certainly one of them.
That's right. You take a look at what oil's doing, you can definitely see, even if stocks brushing off geopolitical concerns and volatility, oil is where that action is happening. We have a lot, Carol.
It's a lot of big issues. It's a lot coming out of Washington, so we're going to get to all of that over the next 60 minutes and more. But first up, folks, you want to know what's going on in the Friday trade session. So let's get to it with Nora Melinda. She's in for Charlie Powell.
Well, we check markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. We have U.S. stocks ticking higher while bonds hold losses, along with the dollar, after President Donald Trump pledged to defend his sweeping global tariffs program after the Supreme Court struck it down. Take a look at the S&P 500. We see it up about 0.7%. The NASDAQ Composite Index currently up about 1%. And that blue chip Dow Jones Industrial Average ticking higher about 0.4%. Take a look at the volatility in the market, and we see the VIX index just below that 19 handle. The yield of the benchmark 10-year Treasury at 4.1%. The policy-sensitive 2-year Treasury yield at 3.5%. Taking a look at oil, we see West Texas Intermediate crude currently lower by about 0.2%. That is trading at $66.32. Also keeping an eye on gold, we see it up about 1.5%, topping that $5,000 key level. And taking a look at Bitcoin, we've got that in focus, down about 0.2%. And keeping an eye, up 1.3% for that Bitcoin there. We do see individual movers, Walmart shares declining for a 4th straight day. That's after HSBC cut the recommendation on the company to hold from buy. The analyst saying that Walmart's 4th quarter results were solid. With volumes growing and e-commerce performance strong, the outlook for 2026 is quote-unquote surprisingly weak, given solid trends. And Live Nation shares climbing after reporting revenue for the 4th quarter that topped the average analyst estimate. Analysts are positive about the company's 4th full-year forecast and strength in its concerts business. And lastly, Newmont shares falling. That's after the company said it expects to produce less bullion this year, partly due to planned upgrades at some of its managed mines and lower production at 2 ventures jointly owned with Barrick Mining. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Nora Melinda, and that's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It is indeed. All right, Nora, thank you so much. Carol Massar along with Emily Garfeo. Tim is off today. All right, let's stay with what is really our top story on this Friday and for the week overall. The U.S. Supreme Court, as you know, saying President Trump exceeded his authority and struck down the president's sweeping global tariffs, undercutting his signature economic policy and delivering his biggest legal defeat since he returned to the White House. President Trump weighed in. As you know, we just came off of it, but he began that press conference from the White House press briefing room talking about kind of his disappointment, I should say, with the nation's highest court.
The Supreme Court's ruling on tariffs is deeply disappointing, and I'm ashamed of certain members of the court, absolutely ashamed, for not having the courage to do what's right for our country. I'd like to thank and congratulate Justices Thomas, Alito, and Kavanaugh for their strength and wisdom and love of our country, which is right now very proud of those justices. When you read the dissenting opinions, there's no way that anyone can argue against them. There's no way. But other alternatives will now be used to replace the ones that the court incorrectly rejected.
All right, and some of those alternatives we just heard from the president in that live press event. That is, of course, President Trump in the last hour from the White House. Meantime, we've also seen the New York Times coming out saying that the president does plan to invoke new trade authorities after the ruling, considering new across-the-board tariff on trading partners. And we talked about his plan that maybe in 3 days we see a 10% tariff across the board. All right, let's get more on the significance of that Supreme Court decision. We head to D.C. Bloomberg News Supreme Court reporter Greg Storr was listening to President Trump as well. He is in the Bloomberg News Bureau in the nation's capital. Greg, it's a big day. We kind of expected this outcome, but I don't know that we expected the decision today. But exactly what was the decision and the significance of it? Walk us through it.
So the significance is that the pillar of the tariffs that the president has been imposing over the last year does not give him tariff authority, the Supreme Court said. It knocked out more than half of the tariffs that Donald Trump has imposed since returning to office. The Supreme Court said that statute, which gives the president certain powers during economic emergencies, does not include the tariff power. And that was sort of the fundamental dividing point. The dissenting justices said, yes, it does. Now, as the president suggested, there are other tariff authorities. He's going to try to invoke those as much as he can, but those do tend to be more cumbersome, more limited, and so we'll see just how much he's able to replace the tariffs that have been struck down.
Where does this go next? Is this ever coming back to the Supreme Court, or are the next steps here really going just back to lower courts?
It's really going to be the lower courts. There will be big fights over refunds in that press conference. The president said he expects that to be litigated over a matter of years. It's not yet clear what argument the administration has against refunds for the $170 billion that have been paid in these tariffs under this law, but it sounds like they are prepared to at least make some of them. So that will be a big fight. And then we may well have future fights over these other laws, including the one that the president said he is going to use to impose that 10% global tariff. That's a more limited authority that is supposed to extend only for 150 days. There may be questions about the exact parameters of what Donald Trump can do under that law.
I am curious too, Greg, about what the president said about foreign influence of the Supreme Court. And he said, in my opinion, the court has been swayed. What is your read on that? And what is he maybe insinuating?
It's a bit of a head scratcher. You know, the president, of course, has always said that these tariffs are paid by foreign countries, not by U.S. importers. Well, U.S. importers have made very clear in suing over these things that they're the ones who are paying for them. And so that is perhaps what he's alluding to there. You know, certainly no evidence of that I've seen in the opinion that it was anything other than their interpretation of what the law and the Constitution require.
I'm wondering, you know, this decision, the 6-3 decision, what kind of clarity does it give us about just how much power the executive branch has? Because, of course, right after the decision, we have Trump coming out and saying, you know, floating another 10% global tariff.
Yeah, well, so kind of two halves to the answer. One half is the president is right. He has other authorities, and the Supreme Court didn't say you couldn't put in place any tariffs at all. You just can't do it using this law that the president has used so far up until now to basically impose tariffs for any reason at all that he wants. So in that sense, it's narrow. But the court also, in a section that was joined by two Trump appointees, Neil Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett, and also the Chief Justice John Roberts, you know, talked about Congress's tariff authority, Congress's taxing authority, and said that unless Congress has clearly handed over that power to the president, we're not just going to assume that the president can do something. There are actual limits to what he can do, and the court invoked some of the opinions it used to roll back, to trim, to knock out some of Joe Biden's initiatives. So the court, at least, you know, 3 Republican-appointed members of the court, as well as the liberals, were trying to send a message that, hey, we are putting some real limits on what this president, like all presidents, can do.
Yeah, and I love that question from Emily and what you just said, Greg, because I do think about, you know, what the president, you know, we've talked so much about the expansion of the executive branch and of presidential powers in the second term of a Trump White House. And it does seem like this president, many would say, can do just about anything, right? We've seen a Congress that's very quiet, a Republican-led Congress. But having said that, how do you read the tea leaves on a Supreme Court that has been seen to be very sympathetic and maybe even political, some would say, to President Trump specifically and his policies to make this ruling? Or did they not really have any choice based on it was pretty black and white in terms of the law?
Well, certainly important to emphasize, as you alluded to, that over the past year, the Supreme Court has let Donald Trump do an awful lot of things that he wanted to do. Most of them only on a temporary basis, letting him fire people, letting him not spend money, letting him end immigration programs. And, you know, that's still a reality that the court is being pretty deferential to Donald Trump in a lot of areas. But these were totally different legal questions. As I said, the Constitution says the tariff power is Congress's, and the court was looking at this case as a separation of powers case, unlike the other ones that it had been dealing with. And this is a place where, from the court's perspective, Donald Trump just went too far.
All right, going to leave it there. Greg, thank you so much. I know a busy day for you. So glad we could get some time with you. Greg Storr, he's, of course, the Bloomberg News Supreme Court reporter joining us from our D.C. bureau. We're going to stay with this story, and we touched on some of this, certainly from the press conference with the president there at the White House, but also with Greg. And we want to get into maybe a little bit more of what we are hearing from that press conference, after that press conference, what's going on inside the White House. And for that, we want to get to Bloomberg News White House correspondent Kate Sullivan, who just ran to the microphone there on the north lawn of the White House. Kate, good to have you here. You were in the room. Tell us a little bit about what that felt like on what is certainly got to be I think safe to say the president's got to be feeling a big defeat with what is a major policy of his second term here in the White House.
Absolutely. So we just wrapped that press conference and we saw a very defiant Trump at the podium. You know, there's a lot to unpack from that press conference, but some of the top lines are the president said that he would be signing new orders to impose tariffs to replace some of these tariffs. He talked about using Section 122 to impose a 10% across the board tariff. Also talked about Section 301, which applies to unfair trade practices. I asked the president about whether this meant that he would now be asking Congress to take additional action when it comes to tariffs, and if he'd spoken to Leader Thune about this. I thought it was really interesting. He said, I don't need to. I'm not going to do that because I don't need to. I felt like the top line from the president was, we're still going to have tariffs, but they're just going to look a bit different. And I thought it was interesting. He talked a lot about certainty. He kept repeating the word certainty, saying that for a very long time we were waiting to see how this